Good evening, everybody. I'm Jennifer Openshaw. I'm the chairman and founder of Girls with Impact. It's so great to have you with us this evening. For those of you who don't know GWI, we are a 501c3 headquartered here in Greenwich, and we are leading the way nationally in preparing young women for day one in the work world, which this woman this evening knows a little something about. We all want our young women in our lives, whether it's you've got daughters, you have neighbors, you have granddaughters, you have nieces. More than ever, we want them to reach their potential because they can have a huge impact in our workplaces and our economy. But speaking of potential, I want to make sure that we all get to reach our potential tonight with Patricia. So if you would, make sure your cell phones are turned off. And then I also want to remind you that we have a lovely reception and book signing afterwards where you are welcome to purchase a copy of Patricia's book, and she'll be there to sign it. So I hope you'll join us for that. I've had the pleasure of knowing Patricia for many years. She has been generous in opening the doors for Girls with Impact and working with school systems and philanthropists. And she has quite a story. I had the pleasure of reading her first book. How many of you read Little Sisters? All right, most of you. That's why you're here tonight, right? It is quite a story, remarkable. So I thought, you know what? She has so much to share for all of us, no matter what age and stage we're at, all of us who are 36 years old. So that's why we decided to bring her to the stage tonight. I know most of us can't say we grew up in a cult. What a story. Patricia did that. She then, as you know, she went on to work in the financial industry and moved up through the ranks to become a partner at Invesco. And one of the things I just want to highlight is that the financial industry globally is a $35 trillion industry. And the reason we at GWI care about this is that we want our young women at the table. And that's what we're doing, and that's why the work that Patricia is doing is so important. Women today make up 50% of the workforce, but they're just 10% of CEOs, and they garner just 2% of the venture capital funding out there. So what GWI is doing is investing early in our young women and making sure they have the skills, the confidence, and the leadership to hit the ground running day one in the workplace. We work with many of our schools there. So today we're going to shine the light on Patricia. Rose up through the ranks at Invesco, a firm that, as you may know, manages $2 trillion in assets. She went on to become a commentator at CNBC, a member of several boards, including the Avon Theater to Glimmerglass. She's also a CEO of Anchor Health, which is so interesting, a healthcare company that she started to serve the needs of the LGBTQ community. Again, we have a reception afterwards and an opportunity to buy her book. Let's welcome Patricia Chadwick. Here she comes, walking down the street. All right, Patricia, it's so great to see you. Sounds like many of you are friends of Patricia, right? I mean, what a legend. So. All right, so we'll just dive in. And here's her book, so amazing. I mean, your first book, I could not, literally, there are many books I can say that I couldn't sit down, but that was one of them. So you grew up in this environment where independence and ambition were discouraged, right? Tell us about it. I mean, the stories are just amazing. How did that impact you?
Well, you are very, very right. I think some of you know that I wrote a first book, which was called Little Sister, which is the story of growing up in what I thought of as a religious community, but came to understand was truly a cult. And I've spent a lot of time now thinking more about that part of it. And one of the focuses was they separated children from their parents, separated parents from themselves. This was Catholic, by the way, for any of you who think there's anything remotely Catholic about that. And then we were being groomed to be religious for the rest of our lives, which was not something I very much wanted to do. But the fact of the matter is there was a lot of discipline. There was a lot of physical punishment. And one of the purposes was to completely break down the relationships the familial relationships that existed, because your only relationship was supposed to be with God. And you had asked me, I think, a question the other day, when did I get my own agency, in a sense? Because when you grow up in that kind of environment, you're fearful all the time. You're doing something wrong. And I was a particularly energetic child, so that meant they would almost make rules for the things I did that I thought were fun, and turned out to have broken the rule they made subsequently. But I do remember when I was about 13 or 14, there were 39 children, 60 grown-ups. Each group of 5 children was, in essence, managed by one of the nuns there. So we were called little sisters. The nuns were big sisters, same little brothers and big brothers. The men had nothing to do with raising the children. So there were 8 of these women. And basically, you had to deal with the personality of that person, and mine was a little odd. At any rate, one day, I was about 13 years old, and she said to me, "Were you in the classrooms this afternoon?" I said, "No." And she said, "Well, where were you?" And I said, "Well," I remember we lived on a big farm out in Harvard, Massachusetts. I said, "I was down at the barn, working with my cows and stuff." And she said, "Are you sure you weren't in the school?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure." And so she was just badgering me. And finally, I said, "I was not in the school." Just that tone of voice could have gotten me, I don't know, 7 weeks of punishment. So we went to benediction, and then we sat down for dinner. Dinner was always in silence until dessert time came. And at dessert time, when we were allowed to talk, I refused to look at her. And when she would direct something at me, I wouldn't look, and I would answer, and she would say, "Look at me." So I would look at her like that. And I was defying her, and I knew I was doing something I had never, ever, ever done before. And I thought, it feels good. And so that night, when we went down home, she would always, kind of say goodnight to each of us. She said goodnight. I didn't say anything back. And then this went on the next day and the next day. And I was feeling as though I had power. And I was also feeling like, is this going to go on forever? And I thought, well, I'm not going to give in. She was blaming me for something I didn't do. And finally, on day 3, she came up to me, and she had tears coming down her face. And she said, "Are you never going to speak to me again?" And I said, "You didn't trust me. You didn't believe me." And she said, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "Fine. It's over."
So what an example of being in your power finally and redefining the whole situation.
to me, but then I saw it in my own child, my girl more than my boy. But you get to that particular age when you're an early teenager and you're desperate to fly the coop. And so you stand up. But that was never done there. Everyone followed orders, everyone obeyed, and I won. And so I came away from that never forgetting it. It may have been as powerful as a situation I had confronting someone in my life. It certainly was the first. And I came away the winner.
Must have impacted the rest of your career, I'm sure. So let's talk about the breaking glass, that term, and you've described that term as both painful and liberating. What does that phrase mean to you today, and how can women know it's time to break their own glass?
It comes in different ways for everyone. There are some people who just plow through, and at the age of 26 are billionaires. Now, I think we see more of those of men than women, but women are perfectly capable, and there's certainly been lots. I grew up in a somewhat more traditional environment in the 60s and the 70s, and I started at the very, very bottom of the scale, of the rungs of the ladder. My first job was as a receptionist. And what I found was that if I tried to make myself valuable. Being a receptionist is not a particularly intellectually challenging position. But I could be at board very easily, but I would then go to the brokers and say, "Listen, I'll get your lunches for you," or "Do you need something Xeroxed?" or this or that. And pretty soon, people knew I was willing to help them, and they would come and ask me to help them. And it was from that that I got those first senses of there's a reward if you reach out and you're helpful to people. And so then I started marching kind of forward, and I had put myself through college over 9 years at night, but I kept moving ahead in my career. I went to become a secretary, then I became a statistician, and eventually I was getting a degree in economics. But it was fascinating to see my own career evolve. There were lots of setbacks, and I think a lot of them were because I was a woman, and I was, maybe I should say, a noisy woman. I let my feelings be heard, but I also was in a man's world. The world of investing still is somewhat, less so, but it was very much a man's world then. But I was a perfectionist. I wanted to get ahead, whatever that meant.
So let's talk about that, right? You just hit on some of rising from research analyst to portfolio manager. I think you were responsible for like billions of dollars in assets. How did you do that? And what steps would you share with other women? It sounds like you were just about to dive into that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you. I was an analyst, a research analyst on Wall Street. I thought it was the best job in the world. I got to interview CEOs, CFOs, challenge them, and find out what I thought they could achieve. And based on that, buy the stock or not buy the stock. And I covered the world of machinery, heavy equipment, Caterpillar tractor, John Deere, all those. And I had been hired by Peter Vermillier in 1980 to be an analyst and head the capital goods group at Citibank. And I was working with other people who were portfolio managers. And in the world of investing, portfolio managers are basically considered one rung above an analyst. And after I'd been there for a couple of years, Peter Vermillier called me into his office and he said, and it was in September, I remember it very clearly, and he said, I want you to become a portfolio manager. I was stunned. I wasn't expecting that. And I really respected Peter. He was one of the best mentors I ever had. And I said, I was quiet. And I said, Peter, you hired me 2 years ago, and I have the best job in the world. I love being on the road. I love meeting these CEOs. I love making those decisions. And I said, may I think about it? I had never said no to Peter before. And he said, okay. And I could see he was disappointed. And I went back to my office, and I was just thinking, I wasn't thinking this is a promotion and this is where I want to go. I was thinking of the intellectual intensity of my job and how much I loved it. And I didn't go back to Peter's office for a few weeks. And then one day in December, so 3 months later, a group of portfolio managers announced that they were leaving and setting up their own firm. And it was at that point I said, Patricia, you know what you have to do. I left my desk, I went down to Peter's office, and I said, yes, I'll be a portfolio manager. So it wasn't really on my terms, but I realized that is part of the playing ball, if you will, that you have to do in moving forward. And yes, I procrastinated, and I disappointed Peter for a while. And then I came to love portfolio management, absolutely loved it. But it was then that I got the reputation of the name of the Witch of Wall Street.
Yeah.
Because when you're putting a portfolio together, all I wanted to do was perfection. And, it wasn't until I had children that I realized perfection was just not the way one should lead one's life. But, so I was, basically throwing myself as hard as I could in this profession. And ultimately taking no prisoners in a way. And most of the people on Wall Street, the analysts, the salespeople, were men. And I learned on my 70th birthday, some 7 years ago, that there was a woman there from Bear Stearns, and she'd been asked to cover us. And because the head of institutional sales said to her, listen, there's this woman at Citibank, she runs a lot of money, and all the men I've put on the account are afraid of her. I couldn't even believe
Gotta
when
love
she said
that.
that. And she said, I hadn't met this woman before, but I'd heard of her because when I was down on the trading floor, they would refer to her as the Witch of Wall Street. Because, I was very, very adamant of the price of I wanted of each stock. If I needed information, I wanted to get it. And this institutional salesperson wasn't going to do it, but there were some very, very good ones. And they knew to go to the analyst at the firm and let me have a conversation. And then I was a happy camper. But, when somebody just would read off to me the morning notes from their meeting, I would go like, okay, I've had enough. I just had to get on. So I built up a bit of a reputation, but I was upset when I first heard that. First I was 70 and I'd had my whole career and been retired. And I thought, how could that be? What did I do? What did I do that was wrong? And then I started to think more about it and think, you know what? The characteristics that get a man called a leader, get a woman called a witch. And I said, don't worry about it. Relish it. Enjoy it. And so I smile now when I think about it.
So you built a successful career. Isn't that great? Successful career. In an industry where there's few women at the table, right? So what's changed for women since then, and what hasn't?
Well, there are many more women in the business. Many more than when I started as a receptionist in 1968. And there are great opportunities for women. And there's a much more of a level playing field. You'll still find on the investment banking side, we work 22 hours a day, and some women like to do that, and some don't, and some men like to, and some men don't. I think there is still a bias in the world of business, and I think primarily of the world of finance. There is still a bias against women. It's probably more subliminal than, truly understood. But everybody thinks at some point she's going to go off and have a family. Mm-hmm. And, we hire people at the firm I'm at now. And then they get pregnant and we go, oh my God, now what's going to happen? Are they going to take 3 months and then not come back? It's a perfectly logical, practical issue to think about. But in a business that's as energized and as, fraught with risk of all sorts, people will think, oh God, I'm going to invest all this money and is she then just going to disappear? And so I think that is an issue. I also think that women have to make their own decisions for themselves and what is right for them in a way that men don't when it comes to family life. Many women I know have worked full-time, had a nanny at home, maybe had a house husband, and were happy with that. But that is not a decision any one of us can make for someone else. Each person has to decide, do I want to have my children early and then come back to the workforce? Do I want to have them later? I ended up having mine much later. I was 45 when I had my twins. But that is an issue that women will always face in the workforce and that men will not face. Yeah. And I think that we have to be wise about simply making the decisions that are best for us and weighing the pros and the cons and doing what makes you feel best, makes you as a woman feel best. And there is no right and wrong. And people will very happily charge on in their career, and others will say, I've plateaued. And when I had my children, I told myself I was going to stop climbing the corporate ladder. And I did for a couple of years. And then it was too enticing to say no. And it was too enticing and too enticing. And eventually, I was working 15-hour days again. And my children were only 6 years old. And I've told the story in Breaking Glass. It was my husband who said to me, it was a Labor Day weekend in 1999, so my children were 5. And he said, you know what, we're having a vacation, we're going to the beach, and you're on conference calls, 3 a day. And I realized he was right. I wasn't taking a vacation. And that night, I thought about it, and the next morning when I woke up, I said, honey, when we go in on Tuesday, I'm going to retire. And that was September of 1999. I left at the end of that year, had no idea what else I might do, but I knew I was doing the right thing at that point for my family. My children were going into kindergarten, and I wanted to be around to answer their questions. And I had a 30-year career because I started so young, and I was happy leaving it.
Great story. Great story. When you faced bias or exclusion, because you mentioned that, how did you decide when to speak up versus just stay back?
That's a good question. There were times when I really wanted a promotion, and I almost always knew why not, because I upset some guy. And if I was promoted, he would be, and I mean, I don't have anything against men, but one in particular said, if she's made the director of research, I'm going to quit. And the person that we both reported to, therefore said to me, I don't want him to quit, so I'm going to do it. And I thought, oh my gosh, anybody can just threaten you with anything. And I thought, okay, move on. I didn't let it affect me. And I think that those things are going to happen all the time in one's career. And I think the important thing is to find a way. You know, when I would be upset, I would say you have three options, two of which you can use and one you cannot. You cannot sit around and mope. That's what I'd say. But if you're upset enough, go find a new job. But the other option is prove them wrong. And I always loved to prove them wrong. And that for me was, in a way, I just worked harder, engaged more, and found a way to move ahead.
What about the biggest myth related to success for women? Are there, experiences you've had that really underscore the myth of success that that you wish women would let go of? Maybe you talked about that earlier.
Well, to me, success can only be defined by yourself, and I think it's really, really important for people not to set impossible objectives for themselves, because you will then perpetually say, I wasn't successful. And I think, so for me, at a certain point, my new objective, my new success in life was to raise my children to be, as wonderful and as good and as caring and as engaged in society as they could be. And I knew to myself that I couldn't do that and simultaneously have a 17-hour day. And so for me, I felt I was successful in leaving behind what had brought me to that point. And I felt wonderfully successful in being with my children, engaged in school, traveling with them, doing all those other things. So I think for people, it's so important to like yourself in the process of what you're trying to figure out. You want for yourself, or you need, or what's going to make you happy. And I think some people are very hard on themselves sometimes, and they find an easy way to say, I'm not successful. And I always find it easy to find something that they're successful at. And it shouldn't necessarily be the first thing they thought when they were out of college was what they wanted. It's good to change. It's Correct. Refreshing. Just the way you change, the skin, your makeup and your face creams. I know there are men in this room too, but your skin likes that. It's good to change what you're thinking about, what's important to you. And it makes variety in your own life, I think. And I feel that I'm always changing, even now.
Yeah, and you're right. That definition changes as you get older because you get wiser about what really does matter, too, I think, right? So let me get your thoughts. So Girls with Impact, as you know, is trying to rewrite the narrative for women and women in the workplace. And a really interesting piece of data that really shocked me from MIT is that women outperform men on 17 of 19 leadership capabilities, but they still resist seeing themselves as a leader in the workplace. And if you think about the impact of that, it's pretty significant. And then young women still take a drop in confidence early on. If you were writing the next chapter in women's leadership, what would be the headline? What would you like to see happen so that more women really can get to the top of leadership? And there's so much data about the economic impact, by the way.
Well, I think I don't know what the short headline might be, but I would say be proud of what you're doing. I think it is so important to have faith in yourself and to find someone. I dedicated my second book to the mentors in my life, and there were like 6 guys. Only one was a woman, and she came before I left. I was kicked out of the cult. She was the teacher that knew I was being kicked out, and she would talk to me in the afternoon and quietly just say to me, you know, you're going to do very well in this world. And she said, you are a great problem solver. But she said, most importantly, you have common sense. And I had never thought of common sense as such an attribute. And there was Sister Anne Mary, who was, to me, just a divine woman, you know, graduate from Radcliffe and Radcliffe Graduate School, was a prototypical teacher. And here she was telling me that my common sense was a big asset for me. I've never forgotten that. But then I had these other men. I would seek out people to just ask them about things that I wanted to learn about in my job. And the role of a mentor to me and the role of a mentee is a very, very important chemistry. And I think everyone can use it, but not everybody is a mentor. I've heard people say I had a terrible mentor, and I said, no, 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 you had no mentor. The mentor is the person that is generous with his or her time. And all my mentors were men. I was in a male-dominated world. And I had no objection, you know, going to them and leaning on them for information and how I might respond to something. One of my most interesting mentors was a guy named Jay Light, whom some of you may know. He was a professor at the Harvard Business School, who ultimately became the dean of the Harvard Business School. And I was at the Ford Foundation at the time, and I had applied to the Harvard Business School. I think I was 28 years old. And I was accepted. And then all of a sudden, I started having second thoughts. I still had a family, you know, my parents and siblings that had come out of the cult, you know, just a few years ago, earlier. And so I felt I needed to be there financially for everyone. And I thought, you know, so I'm going to give up my income, and I'm going to pay tuition, and I'm going to have to borrow because I certainly had not put any assets together at that time. And I asked Jay Light, because he was a consultant to the Ford Foundation. He was there 3 days a week. And I asked him to come into my office, and I told him what had happened, and I said, I'm having second thoughts. And this was a guy who was a professor. You would think he'd go, you've got to go to the Harvard Business School. He said to me, you are a success already. I mean, imagine when somebody that you're looking for advice to says you're a success already. And he said, if you want to manage one of those companies that you follow, he said, that's a changing career, and I would strongly suggest you go to the Harvard Business School. I think it would help you a lot. He said, but if you love what you're doing as an analyst, I was still an analyst, it was before I went to Citibank, and maybe want to move on to portfolio management, he said, you're on the right path already. He said, you do not need the Harvard Business School. And I had no intention of leaving the business. I loved it. And there was a mentor to me who in essence said, turn down the Harvard Business School, and he went on to become the dean of the Harvard Business School. But it was, his words were so true.
Yeah. Well, thinking about second guessing, I want to introduce a next generation GWI graduate, because I always find it so interesting to hear from these young women. So Kelly Taylor is now 23. She went through our program at the age of 16. And Patricia, exactly what you were talking about is exactly what Kelly was experiencing very early on, not sure of herself, moving forward. So you can go ahead and dive in, Kelly. So Kelly is now going to ask you a few questions, and I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Patricia. Your story is amazing, and you have words of wisdom, and they're amazing. So with that, I do have a couple questions.
Okay.
So when I heard of Girls with Impact, I faced imposter syndrome. I didn't think I could do it, and then I did. What would you say to women today who still feel silence at work, at home, and in their minds?
You and I had the same experience. When I applied to the Harvard Business School, I was trying to prove to myself that I was smart enough because I said, yes, I graduated in the top of my class. There were 5 of us, okay.
Wow.
And then I went on to Boston University and I graduated summa cum laude, but I went, okay, I was going at night. Maybe the courses were easier. I mean, I did all this stuff telling myself that the only way I'd find out if I was smart was by applying to the Harvard Business School. And you know, maybe in my subconscious, there was a way in which, okay, because I remember thinking to myself, nobody ever drops out of the Harvard Business School. So I figured I would think it, but I think it's a very common, and I had not realized that I was engaging in imposter syndrome myself. I just thought I was checking the boxes and going, okay, there's nothing, you haven't proven yourself at all. And I think it's hard sometimes for women, maybe more so than men, to see their own achievements as successes and to be proud of them. But wait till you get to be 77. It will be easier because you can look back and you can go, wow, that was a great experience. I learned so much and it was fun all the time. So I think it's a process of maturing that allows you to reap the rewards of maturity, reap the rewards of hard work, and then pretty soon you put the pieces of the puzzle together and you realize, you know, you've done an awful lot. But I think it's something that I think falls to women more than men, because I think in general they sense that their role is to lead, and women don't always think of themselves in that way, even though by being quiet and being thoughtful, they're often leading.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So my next question is, when I joined Girls with Impact at the age of 16, I created a business plan, a venture, saw my confidence go off the roof, landed both a job as well as a full scholarship
Great.
to college as a result. It launched me. I'm grateful for it. But you've been a supporter of Girls with Impact. Why is Girls with Impact important to our daughters and our sisters, our economics, and American global competitiveness?
Well, Girls with Impact is such a beautiful seed that needs to be replicated 100,000 times. And you see it sometimes in the third world countries as well. I shouldn't have said that, in developing countries. Patricia. But I think when women get together and they are supportive of each other and they see progress and they encourage each other, that kind of sorority is what lots of people have thought have gone on for centuries among men as a kind of fraternity of business people. And I think women need to be more and more seen in that same light by being supportive of each other, but also being perfectly comfortable engaging in a man's world. You don't want to separate yourselves as being them and us. You want to be able to engage, find the best, but always be encouraging women. And you know what? A lot of young men these days are not as, to me, as energized as young women. I think there is, I don't know why. I mean, maybe we can say all these gaming things distract them from some things, but I see a lot of young women who are very, very energized about where they want to go. And I think there's never been a better time to show your light and outperform men, if that's what you're looking to do.
Thank you. My final question is, what do you wish everyone here would do to support women and create a level playing field so all women can achieve the same power and influence in business?
I think it can be done without being angry. I think it can be done by actions more than words. I think you've heard the terms of feminista and all this kind of stuff. For me, feminism is just the knowledge that you can do whatever you want. And it doesn't matter how you get there. And I think it's important to be comfortable in who you are. And I think, frankly, the playing field is much better than it was, but actions speak louder than words. And I think we just have to always be inviting women into the same challenges that men are invited into. And I think it's happening. I mean, look at the world of medicine. I think more than 50% of the med school students are women now. And, only 40 years ago, the ratios were, enormously different. The world of finance may always be a little different, but, I run a healthcare company. The amount of hours, the energy that people put in, men and women, working with patients is extraordinary. And I think women have just simply proven that they can match brain for brain with men. And I think that the more we treat it as a normal way of life, the better. And I think in these political environments that we're facing today, there's a lot of talk about going backwards in that regard. And I think it's just important for us to ignore that as noise and just keep moving forward.
Focus on the future. Thank you, Patricia. We'd love to take your questions in just a moment. If any of you are interested in learning a little bit more about GWI, just so you know, our programs we bring into the school systems and colleges and community, probably some of you know young women who've gone through it. This is just a way for you to connect with us. We have a really special tea coming up, our gala in February. You can also text me. Would love to be connected with all of you. Does anybody have any questions for Patricia? Patricia, and while we're thinking, anybody have any questions? Yes, we do. Oh, we've got like 3 of them. Siobhan will come down. And that community of support, Patricia, you were talking about is really what we're trying to do as these young women enter the workplace. So,
thank you. My question is to understand a little bit more about the healthcare initiative that you just spoke of.
Okay, the company's called Anchor Health, and we are headquartered here in Stamford. We are now the largest LGBTQ committed healthcare company in Connecticut. Our patients are primarily here, and we have basically provided an environment that is safe for members of the LGBTQ community. People don't often understand who are not members of the community. They don't understand how hard it can be for someone who is not in the gay community to go to a doctor that does not understand it. So almost all of our providers, our medical assistants, our nurses, nearly all of them are members of the community. And we have others that are not, but we know that everyone knows that the whole environment is meant to be safe for everyone. And we have transgender programs as well, and we are the largest transgender entity in the state of Connecticut. And we have about 5,000 patients. We have close to 60 employees now. We are also in Hamden, and we will be opening up in Hartford as well. And we have patients that come from all corners of the state, so we want to be moving out so we can be closer to them. Is that helpful? But you can go to our website, anchorhealthct.org, and there's a huge amount about us there. And yes, there are challenges these days with the federal government, so we have tended to take the pictures of people, of employees down, so that they don't have to be targeted in any way.
Siobhan, I think there's a few other questions down over here.
Patricia, way back when you were in the cult, you gathered the strength to defy your nun. And you did. You had such strength because you knew the consequences would be serious and you would be punished. So what advice do you think you would give Jennifer and her group in advising these wonderful young girls to gather the strength that you kind of had? I mean, it's
Being in your
so
power.
inspiring and so impressive, and I just don't know if there's anything that you could say to Jennifer and these young girls to inspire in them that strength.
Well, each one of us is different, and we each grow up, you know, informed by our environment. And my experience when I was 13 was quite interesting to me, mostly in hindsight, because I didn't know anything about puberty, truth be told. When I got my period, Sister Catherine told me, "Oh, you're just like our Blessed Mother. She had it too." And that was the end of the conversation. So I knew nothing about hormones, or, I mean, I knew I was interested in some boys, that was for sure, for which I was, you know, hideously punished. But what I found was so interesting is that things come naturally. And when you find success in something, be it a bold move, which I only did because I think I was trying to fly the coop in a way, when you find success, build on it. And encourage each other, because everybody has to do it differently, everybody. And, but I will tell you, one of my younger sisters at this place, she had terrible eating disorders, terrible. I mean, I've told her the stories in the first book. I would eat her food for her so she wouldn't get into trouble. And I said, "Kathy, when did you get your voice?" And she said it was one day, and we had a history test, and the nun gave everybody a 0 except for one person. Now remember, these people were husbands and wives and were separated. She had a son who was in the class. She gave him 100, and everybody else got a 0. And my sister Kathy walked across the yard to the main house, walked into Sister Catherine's office, and said, "I've had it." And I studied, and every one of us got a 0 except for, she named this person. And Sister Catherine said, "Thank you for telling me. I will handle this." And Kathy said this was the first time in her life she ever spoke up. And because she was so adamant, she was, again, about 14 years old, and she was so adamant that even Sister Catherine didn't say, "Shut up and go away." She thought, "I've got a child here who's very angry, and I need to resolve that." So there will be times when you cannot control your ability to keep quiet, and I think that's okay, as long as you find a way to do it. In my case, I didn't yell at her, I merely ignored her. And I think in other cases, whenever you see someone doing that, my case was completely different. I didn't know Kathy was doing it either. It was very hard to support each other. But in the real world, you can support each other. And I think that when you see someone being bold, look at that as powerful. Is that an okay way? Thank you.
Thank you. And our hope is, and Kel, you've been through that program, but in doing tough things and verbalizing them in a group, you build your confidence, I think, to some extent. I don't know if you want to add anything, and then we'll close up there.
Yes,
Let's
so
do-
thank you again, everyone. I hope all of you were here to take the time to learn about Girls with Impact, leading the way for the nationally to level the playing field in business. We're ensuring young women reach their full potential, and we're arming women with the confidence and skills to network and to equally influence power. And so, Patricia, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for what you've achieved so far. I'm so impressed. What are you doing now?
I am currently doing public relationships communications.
Are you?
Yes, I am.
She was working on the WIN project for Avangrid, making quite a hefty salary, working with CEO, pretty phenomenal at like 22. So went through college and then into that, and that was pretty phenomenal.
That's fantastic.
So, all right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Reception, book signing, we'll see you over there right down the hall in the blackbird box. All right.
What's that?